Andrew, good morning. It's Bill. Thank you so much for coming on the show. On this last point, we had Toby Cosgrove on earlier, and he was talking about the obesity epidemic. And if you go all the way back, I believe, to the fall of 2006 when you became CEO, you foresaw these changes coming in terms of consumer eating and drinking habits, and you put some markers in place to try to, if you will, morph your strategy or build your strategy. How's that playing out? Now here we're some 7 years later. How's that playing out for you, and what do you anticipate looking forward for the next 2, 3, 4 years in terms of how you're going to handle that, and what's really going to happen? What is PepsiCo doing specifically to build its growth so that you can sustain growth, because that is really the long-term goal that you have as CEO?
Absolutely. Bill, that's a great question. I tell you, when I became CEO in 2006, if you looked at the public projections of the growth rate of the carbonated soft drink category or the snacks category, especially the savory snacks category, everybody was forecasting boom times, 5, 6, 7% growth. And even in the United States, people were forecasting 3 and 4% growth for the carbonated soft drink category. That's the forecasters were using mathematical models. But if you really dug underneath that and looked at the public policy debates going on, the consumer chatter going on, what hospitals were talking about, the trend was going to be different. And that's what made me jump into action and say, look, we have to start transforming our portfolio for the trend that's coming that, really is based on deep analytics, not a trend based on just a projection of a line. And when I looked at that, I realized that PepsiCo, which is a big, iconic American company, now participating in the whole world, had to transform its portfolio because our portfolio was more fun-for-you products. So the strategy was very simple. We said, let's reduce the salt, sugar, fat in our fun-for-you products. Let's dial up the zero-calorie products. And let's really lean into the good-for-you products, but make the good-for-you products with positive nutrition taste great, so that no consumer had to make a choice between taste and health or price and health. You don't have to pay more for a good-for-you product. This transformation, I'd say, was an extremely difficult transformation for 2 simple reasons. We were taking the culture of a company that had been around for decades and asking all of ourselves in the company to fundamentally change how we think about our products. But the reason it was even more difficult than just the change management inside the company was that I had too many critics outside the company. Everybody kept telling me that I was not proud of my categories, that I had to focus more on salt, fat and sugar. There were just far too many critics. Fighting the outside critics was more difficult than transforming the company. I think today we've crossed that. Yeah,
you overcame that a couple of years ago with some of the changes.
I think though it's fair that we ask a couple of questions though about the critics. So there is this lingering question about whether the company should be one. You talk about the power of one and whether it should be split up. Is there any specific data that you can point to that suggests that Frito-Lay has helped increase the growth rate of the carbonated drinks? Because if you look at a number of analyst reports, it's hard to suggest or hard to get there. And I was hoping that you might have some data that gets you there. It may make you thirsty, but
makes you. It's not that. Sounds like peanut butter and jelly.
It's a fair question. Let her answer the question.
So let me go through. Joe, you're a big consumer of Frito-Lay products. Anytime you eat a Frito-Lay product, Fritos in particular. In fact, Fritos. Let's talk about that. If you eat a bag of Fritos, do you reach for a beverage?
Yes.
I think you do. When you go to a tailgate party, do you take snacks and beverages together? Absolutely. When you sit down to watch a game, do you have snacks and beverages? Yes. These two go together. They are better together, whatever you say. Now, does the growth rate help each other? Absolutely. Look, in the United States, when you really think about the big holidays, going to the retailer and talking about putting the two together drives traffic, drives ticket. Let me tell you another one. When retailers have a slowdown in sales, the first person they call is PepsiCo, because we are large, we are high velocity categories, and they say, come in and tell us what you can do to do some more lobby displays, do some promotions in the perimeter so we can get the traffic in and start getting the sales up. So I think that these two categories are better together,
Indra,
not just in the United States, around the world.
Well, let me ask you about that around the world, because when you think about the fastest growing markets in the world for your business, invariably you think of China, you think of Mexico. You reached bottling deals in both of those countries in 2011, which Nelson Peltz has publicly said that you mortgaged the company's future and you have divided the Frito-Lay business from them, so you can't get the synergies. What do you say to that?
I wish people would go in and see how we run those businesses. And I hope this is not a conversation about anything but leadership, but let me come to that. If you look at China, our whole business, the marketing, how we think about the products, all of that is done together. I was in China 2 months ago. Chairman Wei, the chairman of Tingyi, who is our partner in beverages, you know, we worked very closely together on what innovation pipeline, what do we do together with foods and beverages. The businesses work well together. The reason we franchised the business in China to Tingyi is because they were ahead of us in a manufacturing footprint and a distribution footprint. So it made sense to partner with them. Look, what we are deploying is sensible strategies. At the end of the day, the products work together. In fact, China is the only country in the world where the advertising campaign, you know, for Chinese New Year has Pepsi, Tropicana, and Lay's in the same commercial. And I think China is an example of better together at its best.
Right. Yeah. How do you think about this, though? You know, and people have, analysts have said this, others have said this. When you look at the total shareholder return of the company since you joined 2006, on an annual basis, 7%. Consumer staples, 11%. Coca-Cola at 12%. And I know you, part of that is probably investing in changing a lot of the mix. But do you think it's more than that? Do you think it has anything to do with the structure at all?
Okay, Andrew, this is where I think it's very, very important that you look at the right time frames, because you pick any time frame you want for any company, you can make them look good or bad. In fact, I can say in the last year, our total shareholder return is twice that of our principal competitor. But let me go back. From 1997 to 2006, the other beverage company went through a massive meltdown, went through 4 CEOs, a massive meltdown. At that point, we were doing very well. They took a gigantic reset and they started coming out of it. PepsiCo's been a steady performer over that time. So why don't you look at our 10-year returns? They're phenomenal. So I look at this issue in terms of how do you manage a company for duration of returns, not do a boom splat. Because I think the worst thing a CEO can do is to manage the company for 5 years of returns. You know, it's like, you know, this cartoon where the guy runs and then stops. We can't do that. We've got to manage this company for a steady growth in performance, not a boom splat.
Okay. Indra, last question.
I don't subscribe to that approach.
Indra, thank you for joining us. And let me say thank you for answering some of these questions candidly and forthrightly. And I know some of them are tough, but people do want to know.
It took a Yale studio to get you on, and you know George couldn't handle it at Harvard.
Thank you for your leadership, Indra, and I hope at the end of the day we're going to help get at some of these problems thanks to your leadership.
Sonnenfeld wanted to point that out, that you were unable to come up with a studio. It had to be at Yale, even though you're at Harvard, right? A Yale had to come through. Anyway, still to